the Graveyard Girls.
Right, so...
I can sit back and relax, it's fine.
Yeah. I've got a slightly different one for us today. It is a mystery, but it's kind of, I suppose there's a science element to it.
Oh, I'm already interested.
But it's also very historical. So I've got to go back in quite a lot of history and almost look at a bit of literature as well for this. So it's a bit of an unusual one.
Did you look at the greats?
No. It's... So today's case is about a beast.
Okay.
Now, I found out about this through a book that my sister had, and that book is called The Science of Monsters.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this book.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. To anyone that wants to have a little look at it, do. And I think I might also get a couple of other cases from this, or at least some information and research for other cases through this.
Yeah.
Because it's absolutely brilliant. And my sister was describing this book to me and things in it. And then the way she was just sort of explaining it, and then we were going through the theories, I was like, this sounds absolutely amazing. Like, it would make such a good case. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way before.
Yeah.
So then when I looked at it, I was like, right, okay, I'm going to have to read over this myself. And then the more I read into it, I was like, yeah, I definitely need this as a case. I really like it because there's a few different theories as to where they've originated from. And
Okay, I've got a few ideas in my head.
Yeah, one of them goes back to one of my favourite animals. So, not animal. Well, I suppose it was an animal.
Okay, it's completely changed my theory, but yes, continue.
So basically today, I am looking at the mystery of the dragon.
Oh.
And where did it come from? So, obviously, there's
one theory that I looked at that they thought back in the day when they kept digging up dinosaur bones that they thought they were dragons.
Yeah, and I will touch on that because it mixes in with that's basically my theory.
Because growing up, I thought dragons were real because I thought princesses didn't exist,
but dragons did.
No, I can't explain.
Well, princesses do exist, but
no, but in my head,
in a fairy tale sort of way.
So I thought, seeing as we have princesses, we should have had dragons. They've just died out.
Yeah. Well, this is where, for me, like the dinosaur element mixed in with some of these other theories, I feel like it's a brilliant explanation as to where our dragon has been born from.
Okay.
So I feel like the dragon kind of is real, but there's elements of it explain why it isn't a physical reality. But you can understand how it is developed.
It would make sense if it was real because it's in so many different cultures' mythology.
Yeah.
So you've got the Chinese, you've got the Welsh dragon, you've got... Yeah. I can't even think.
Well, this is it, and it goes straight back to ancient times. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, we've all heard of dragons, or you've at least been told a tale about it, and obviously your dragon slayers. But, like, where did
dragons?
But where did they actually originate from? So, and the other thing to notice as well is, despite the fact that they've had a long lifespan in history in terms of the tales, they've actually had a remarkably, like, consistent form. Because you look at other creatures, like, they've massively changed throughout the years. So, obviously, to look at this, I had to sort of go, not back to the beginning, but...
Beginning of time.
Yeah, I had to obviously look at the earliest references to, like, literature and, like, where they were referenced from. So...
where would that be? Sorry, yeah, I know. I'm just thinking, in my head, I'm thinking Chinese.
No, a bit
China.
before that.
Okay.
So, obviously, the earliest reference to dragons dates back to 900 BC.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and according to Babylonian mythology...
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was there was a great conflict between Aspu and Tiamat and their children. And in this conflict, Aspu was killed... Tiamat grew angry and was said to have transformed into a serpent creature with horns and a wriggly body.
I think there's some dragon mythology in Maori culture as well, I think. I could be wrong.
I'm not sure. I didn't pick that one up in this bit.
Okay, sorry.
A cylinder seal in the British Museum shows Tiamat with a horned head, lengthy tongue, tiny forelimbs and a very long body. It's obviously like massively resembles a serpent-like creature. And Babylonians would have had exposure to venomous snakes. So when you look at it like that, it's possible that they took that, took the creature from that to create their god in like a frightening form. However, the horns is providing a bit of a mystery in that sense because we associate dragons with like a horned head, whereas obviously serpents don't have horns.
Or it's just Loki being a trickster.
Didn't think of that. So then we looked at animals that obviously would have been around at the time to see if there could have been a crossover. Now, obviously, there's things like goats who have horns, but goats weren't seen as a scary animal. So
no,
a lot
just
of these
have scary eyes.
Yeah, so a lot of these creatures derive from things that people are fearful of. But there is another possible explanation for that, and that is that there was a highly venomous snake known as the sand viper. It had long fangs that could puncture human skin, a foul temper, and a very potent venom. It's still massively disputed as to whether this specific snake is related to the dragon that Tiamat transformed into, but it has scales on its head, and just behind the eyes, the scales grow larger than those on the rest of its head, and some said that depicted horns.
Okay.
So that could explain where that sort of, because it looked at artwork and it does depict a serpent with horns. So there's suggestions that like this is where your first dragon is born from.
Okay.
Then the next major connection to dragons in history is in the 5th century BC, when Greek poet Pindar wrote the story of the Golden Fleece, in which Jason goes to the witch Medea to collect the fleece from a dangerous creature. In this he wrote, "For the fleece was laid in a deep thicket, held within the fierce jaws of a ravenous dragon, far surpassing in length and breadth the ship of 50 oars." However, then at about the same time, there's a bit of a contradiction, according to a poet and scholar called Apollonius Rhodius.
Is he Greek?
Yes.
Okay, sounds Greek.
So, and in that he writes, "The fleece was spread on top of an oak, watched over by a serpent, a formidable beast who peers round and never, day or night, allows the sweet sleep to conquer his unblinking eyes." So the other one sort of...
That's kind of making it seem like he's the dragon watching over all the gold.
Yeah, which when you look at connections much further down the line, it kind of matches that, which is how people have managed to make the link of this being an earlier record, because there's a bit of a crossover. Now, it's also worth noting at the time that in Greek texts, they call the monster Drakos, which is a word from which the Anglo-Saxon word draken and the more modern words drake and dragon are thought to have come from. But the Greek term is open to interpretation, as it was also used at that point in time for the word snake.
Do you touch on the stars being called Draco?
No.
I'm just trying to think time-wise when they named the star sign. Not the star sign, the constellation Draco. Because that's serpent-like.
Oh, is it?
I'd say it's more like a snake than a dragon.
Well, this is what my theory is for this bit, is that it wasn't a dragon, it is a snake.
Okay.
But I need to obviously
I know,
explain the rest of it.
I know, I was just wondering, time, I don't know when they named the constellations.
I'm not sure. Well, yeah, I'm not sure actually. I feel like it would have been by then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but the Greek term is obviously open to interpretation, as it's also used in points of time for the word snake. It's also possible why some English translations, various historical accounts, may say the creature that Jason fought was a serpent and not a dragon. Obviously, the good old Greeks like to make things very complicated for us. And they completely complicate the idea and the origin of the dragon, because in the Greek play Medea, which describes the activities of Medea after she helped Jason steal the Golden Fleece, in this, she runs into some trouble with the law after she murders a king and his daughter. To make her escape, she uses her magic to conjure up dragons. And in this play, the dragons can fly, which is not a characteristic of serpents. So they've now made it very confusing for us, because is it just loosely based off a serpent, or is there another creature altogether? So then a Roman poet, Ovid, wrote that after dragons had pulled Medea's chariot over a great distance, the dragons had sloughed their skins of many years, which suggests that they shed their skin like snakes do. But this would only explain some of the physical appearance of dragons. So, for example, when you take into consideration the supposed size, or more specifically the height of a dragon, venomous snakes don't match that at all.
Yeah.
So then this is when it brings me into a much more modern version, and obviously it's people that have looked back into the history of it. So in 1977, the author Carl Sagan wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden.
Yeah.
And in this, he writes that we need to consider the ancient environment where early mammals first lived and think about the fears that humans would have had.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, mammals evolved during the Mesozoic era when reptiles ruled the world. The few mammals that were around at the time were tiny rodent-like creatures that spent their time running away from much larger reptiles like velociraptors and Tyrannosaurus teeth. So basically, they're running away from what was still left, if you like, of the last of the dinosaurs.
I do like Carl Sagan.
Sagan suggested that the appearance of any mammal genes would have coded for an inherent fear and respect for the larger reptile, which in turn would have increased their chance of survival. This fear would have then been driven by natural selection and have become common throughout the early mammal population. Sagan also pointed out that as a common sound, this is like a little side note, he pointed out that the common sound humans make around the world still today to command attention is shh, or like starts with that sort of sensation.
Yeah.
And asked the question, can we view it as just a chance that this happens to be the sound made by snakes?
Oh.
So he sort of looks into it in that way.
Mm.
Then in more recent years, Sagan's theory has gained support. A reason for this was there's a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the year 2011, and it looks into the interactions between preliterate Philippine hunters and giant pythons.
Mm.
And in that case study, they found that 26% of the local population had been attacked by huge pythons during living memory. Most had substantial scars from the bites made during the snake's attempt to grab hold of them. It was also noted that 16% of people knew of at least one tribe member who had been killed by the reptiles. Researchers from that study counted up a total of 6 fatalities in the past generation. So then it looks into the people, these fatalities, and basically one man was found inside the body of a large snake that killed him. His son cut it open in 1940. Then another man did not return home from hunting one day and was then found the following afternoon crushed to death in the coils of a python.
God.
Then 2 children had been consumed by a python that had slithered into their home before sundown in 1973. In that same year, a lady died from an infection that had developed from a python's bite. Now, in this study, it found that those pythons that had attacked were between 16 and 32 feet, which is 6 to 10 metres.
Can you imagine just laying in bed and then this thing
Just
Just
comes
like-
at you.
it's like,
Slithers at you.
you don't even notice. It's just like a thicker blanket.
Oh.
Just and like you slowly, and then you're inside.
Oh, no. And then you're like, this is getting a bit cosy.
Yeah, it's like, it's a bit slimy. Why is this slimy?
Exactly. So when they were looking at it, most of these pythons made ambush-style attacks in dense forests on men hunting with large knives. What most astonished these scientists when they were putting the study together was the fact that even though these men had knives and were attacking with them, there was still a high fatality rate, obviously on the men. So even though they had massive knives, the hunters were dying and the snakes were winning.
Yeah.
So I felt a little bit of a
Sorry, I'm just still.
on my arms.
No. The snake just coming into your house, and you're like, no.
Yeah, it's like giving up.
May as well just die. Because imagine if a snake comes through that door right now.
But I also feel like there's that element of like with an animal, if like with a bee or a wasp, like, stay still, it won't sting you. Whereas like with a snake, I feel like if you make a lot of noise and try and run off, it's definitely attacking you because it feels threatened.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just stayed still, you could maybe hope it wouldn't get you.
So, out of the two of us, you're going to be eaten by a snake.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm at least getting crushed to death in its coils.
And I'm running away. No, I'm just.
It's more like to
tiptoeing.
bite you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because like I'm not really putting up a fight. I'm just hoping it's going to slither past me and prefer the scent of you. Or maybe you screaming and running off, it distracts it and it goes after you.
I wouldn't scream. I'd just be like, oh my God. Very quietly. You're the one making the noise.
I think either way, it's not a good thing. If you're going to make a lot of noise and try and run off, you're
I'm not
attracting
running.
its attention.
Yeah, I'm
it's
not
going
running.
to try and bite you in its defence, isn't it? Because it's maybe worried you're going to attack it.
Well, if it's going for me, just back off slowly. And then
Okay.
I see you back off, I'll start moving. So then it'll go for me.
Right, okay. Well, and
Okay.
confuse it, and then I'll make another noise in the distance to distract it again.
Now I was just letting you run away and I get eaten by the snake.
Oh, okay, thanks for saving my
Sacrifice
life.
yeah. I'll sacrifice myself.
But yeah, no, but like I said, it doesn't work either way. Like I said, if you make a lot of noise, it's going to attack you because it's going to feel threatened. But if you just lay there, you're also easy prey. So I feel like there's no good solution in this part. Either way, you're sort of...
I thought that would work, but yeah. The people just laying in bed being consumed.
Which is probably why there's still quite a high fatality rate.
Just a snake coming into your house and just
I feel like it's one of those beasts, like you've got to hit it in the right point, otherwise you won't kill it. Like if you just stab it, you're just going to anger it more.
Yeah, or you try and throw something to make a noise behind it, and it's like, nah.
Yeah, I'm not falling for that. I'm not stupid.
Like, oh. It's like, you're just accepting your fate.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've got to decide, do you want to be bitten, or do you want to be slowly crushed to death?
I don't want to be crushed to death.
I don't know how quick it is.
That sounds painful.
I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Unless they just swallow me whole and then I just die in their acid. That doesn't sound great either.
Yeah, I don't feel like any of these solutions are brilliant. Let's just not get killed by snakes.
Okay. That's fine.
I don't think that's a good idea. We'll just never go anywhere where there's giant pythons, all right?
Okay, that's fine.
We'll agree on that one. So then looking at that recent study about the pythons provided evidence that huge non-venomous snakes have been feeding on humans for a long time. So this raises the question where were the depictions of the Babylonian Tiamat a mixture of sand viper characteristics and giant constrictor snakes?
Oh.
So then again, we're kind of going a little bit back in history now, because there's reports made by Roman historians in the summer of 256 BC.
Mm-hmm.
Roman troops, so this is basically a bit of not an expedition that they're going on, but obviously some sort of training with Roman troops. They're heading towards what today is known as Tunisia, and on this march they were attacked by a giant serpent when they came to a river. In it, they described the soldiers as being devoured, and that neither the javelins they hurled nor the darts they rained upon its back had any effect. They also said that the creature struck the soldiers, driving them mad by its poisonous breath. So again, thinking this is where the dragon links come in. They described the creature as looking as though it seemed to lack feet, yet it had ribs and scales graded evenly, extending from the top of its throat to the lowest parts of its belly, and so arranged that the creature rested upon its scales as if on claws, and upon its ribs as if on legs.
Oh.
Which now goes away from it slithering on the floor to holding a much more similar posture to that of a dragon. The creature they are describing is clearly a snake of some sort. The poisonous breath can be explained by the foul smell from the river, and even though the snakes cannot eat multiple adult humans in such a short time, it's possible that a number of men were bitten and drowned by a single large snake. However, no snake is known to exist in the 120 feet in length described by the Roman historians. So it's a thing of, did they exaggerate it? But then people have tried to confirm that, and the closest python, when they've looked into it, the closest python relative from the days of the dinosaurs grew to 48 feet. But obviously this didn't coexist with humans, so 48 feet is massively different from 120, and there's nothing said to be this size at that time. So then...
how many of the soldiers survived?
None, apparently. Or very little.
So who witnesses this giant...
So I'm not sure if someone's come along afterwards, like the aftermath, and found all the bodies killed by the river.
And then they're like, it was a 120-foot dragon.
Yeah.
Okay. That would explain that no one survives, so then there's no...
Yeah, and the air of mystery of what it looks like, which is a sort of thing I'll touch on a bit later when you look at it, because there's so many things around it, but technically no one's seen it. So obviously going back to the whole... the 48-foot ones couldn't have coexisted with the humans. It does bring up that the possibility of the authors were either incorrect in the measurements or embellished the size to make a greater sounding creature.
Yep.
This is then backed up by a man named Richard Stothers, who in 2004 wrote about an incident at the Bagridas River. He proposed that the ancient report mixed up 120 feet in length with a figure of 120 rib pairs, which is possible for snakes to have.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like he sort of disproved them, but also explained that maybe it's not that they were exaggerating, but that they might have got it slightly wrong.
Yeah.
Or it also could have been lost in translation.
Yeah.
He also argued that even though large constrictor type snakes are not found north of the Sahara today, the elder reported large snakes sometimes swimming in groups across the Red Sea from Ethiopia to Arabia. If this was true, it's not impossible that they could have made it to the Baghdad River. So these giant serpents could have been living along the side of this. All of this put together hint that older civilizations may have encountered some large constrictor type snakes in northern Africa. Then when you add these stories to the hundreds of people who died in living memory to snakes and reptiles such as crocodiles, going back to Sagan's theory, it makes a lot of sense, and that it's possible there really is an ancient genetically based fear of reptiles present in mammals, especially when you put together the fear of snakes and ancient reptile-like bones. However, no constrictor snakes or marine reptiles explain the fact that dragons were known for their ability to breathe fire, which brings me on to the next
This is what I was going to ask, because I was like, did they breathe fire, or is it just because...
This is where, for me, the next person's theory on where dragons come from makes much more sense, because to us, what we've known dragons is for breathing fire. So it's a case of, can you sort of throw out...
I have, if they, cause sometimes they shoot it out, doesn't it? If it touches your skin, does it burn? Is that what they're equating to fire?
I'm going to kind of touch on that as to where it sort of come from, and it would explain it, it would explain why people get burnt by dragons in some of these stories. So obviously for us, as we know, the dragon breathing fire is a massive characteristic. So if you want to go on from this, then you could sort of not throw out the ancient version of a dragon, but could you say that was actually almost another beast entirely, and actually the ancient ones are based off a snake, whereas the more modern dragons based off something else. Okay. So if you want to look at whether dragons really did breathe flames from their mouth, one of the earliest tales of dragons breathing fire is that of the story of Beowulf, and this story was foretold somewhere around 800 to 1100 AD. In that, the dragon starts setting fire to everything after a valuable cup is stolen from a treasure trove that is guarding an inside burial mound. Dragons breathing fire are again mentioned in 1136 AD in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of Kings in Britain. In this, King Vortigern is desperately trying to build a fortified tower in the hills of Wales, yet every time his men lay down stone to build the tower, the ground trembles and the structure is destroyed. Searching for answers, the king turns to his men, who advise him to find a boy without a father and pour the child's blood over the ground to calm it so the stones can be properly placed. The king sends scouts out to find such a child, and within doing that, they discover a boy dwelling in what today is known as the Welsh town of Carmarthen. Upon learning how his blood is to be used, the boy tells the king that he has it all wrong. He argues that there's a dragon beneath the building site and that the ground cannot be built upon. When the king orders the earth to be dug up, dragons are discovered in hollow stone, fighting with one another and breathing out fire as they panted. The dragon dismisses his aides and declares that the boy will become his new advisor. The boy goes on to support the king as well as his successors, including eventually Arthur. He, of course, is the legendary Merlin, and revealing dragons underground is his first demonstration of magical ability. Now, this is where later on in the case it gets absolutely brilliant when you link it back to this story. So when you look at those two particular stories,
I'm going to sound really dumb. Is King Arthur real?
I didn't think he was, but now when I read this, I think there was a King Arthur.
Okay.
I think the story we know as Merlin is obviously embellished.
Yeah.
But I think it comes from the real king.
Okay.
And you'll see what I mean, because I was a bit confused like that. But when you look at this and the science side of it, I think it was.
I was like,
real.
do I ask the dumb question?
No. I thought exactly the same, because I just presumed Merlin was a made up thing, like.
Because King Arthur took the sword out of the stone, right?
Yeah, I think so. But obviously Merlin before, they still heavily believed in magic.
Yeah.
And the whole dragon things underneath. And I thought it was just a made up thing, like Harry Potter and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's actually based, when you look at obviously the Welsh on their flag, they've got a dragon. This is where it stems from.
Okay.
So it kind of is real. Obviously the Merlin we know is slightly embellished, and obviously it goes on to have much more added to it, but it stems from a real thing.
Okay, I got you. I just was like, am I really dumb? Is this
real? No. I thought exactly the same. So when you look at those stories in particular, the presence of so much fire breathing and medieval dragon lore suggested that trait was important and connected to something that people were genuinely scared of. But what exactly was that? So obviously now people are looking into the science of it and thinking, okay, this story, I know people do make things up, but it comes from something. So what is that something? Now, you think by this point, humans have been using fire for hundreds of years. So there's been long enough for times people sort of developed a respect for fire and the damage it can cause. Long before fire came under our control, it was mostly present in environmental form. For example, forest fires starting when lightning strikes.
Yeah.
When fire strikes, human and other animals naturally flee. So that makes for a natural fear of fires in their minds. So sort of where it's coming from. However, forest fires do not create the illusion of anything breathing fire. So it's unlikely that these fires, or even campfires that got out of hand, inspired the dragon's breath. Although, then this is when we go into slightly more into the sciencey side of it. Scientifically looking at fires, and when fires are alive, you also need two things. So that's fuel to burn and oxygen. You run out of either one of those, and obviously eventually your fire's going to die out.
Yeah.
So in the case of a wildfire, such as that across meadows of dried grass, there's a large area of both oxygen and combustible material, being the dried grass.
Yeah.
So this would make a fire roar to life, which is where you start bringing in the dragon sound.
Yeah, because is the possibility of it being real, can there physically be a living, breathing thing that can make fire within itself?
I don't think so, but I think I explain it in this scientific theory as to where it sort of comes from.
Because if it comes out your throat, you're going to burn your esophagus no matter what you are.
And this is how I think scientifically they've explained it, kind of.
Okay.
So even underground, if it was to reach a vent of natural gas, it could easily cause a massive explosion, which if witnessed by a person, you're shitting your pants. Yeah. So you go back a good few hundred years, people don't really understand this sort of thing. You don't know how we know it today.
Yeah.
So now natural gas vents do exist in some places on Earth, and this could be where the connection of fire-breathing dragons was made. The natural gas vents are also associated with some scents, such as that emanating from tar deposits, hence the smelly, fiery breath. The only issue with this is that these gas vents are usually found in places such as Turkey, and when you look at the middle-aged dragons, they usually live in subterranean locations underground guarding treasure. So you can kind of go back and explain this. So going back to Beowulf's dragon, he's living in a burial mound. Merlin's is under the foundations of the king's castle. Smaug from Lord of the Rings lives under the Lonely Mountain.
Yep.
Even in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the dragon is guarding treasure below Gringotts Bank. So then I had to look in to see if there was any similar flammable gas in the UK or Europe in general. And when I did that, I found that it does exist. I actually discovered that there's more likely to be miners that run into explosive gas. It's much more common for them to run into it than it is people above ground. It's also worth noting that miners would have brought light in the form of open flames down to the mines with them to help them see. So then this is where the theory that I think is most likely sort of comes into it. So basically, imagine you're an ancient or at least a Middle Ages miner holding an open flame torch. You and your other mining mates are chipping away when suddenly you hit a vent. That releases a burst of gas. This would be a quick burst of fire, and the fire would start very quickly and would seemingly be breathing from behind the rock. Obviously, at that time, any of the miners, or anyone for that fact, wouldn't have had a very good understanding of combustion, and so it would be easy to believe that it was fire-breathing dragon behind these rocks.
Yeah, so that's what's gonna be in their mind. It's not science. There's a living, breathing thing
behind it. This explains the scenes in which dragons live underground and their ability to breathe fire. It even explains their size and people seeing them as large, powerful monsters. Also, a really big combustion can mimic the sound similar to that of roaring. So again, you've explained your noise and your size. Yeah. So when you go back to the stories of Merlin in Wales, it's plausible that the men digging underground had open torches. They hit a source of flammable gas, and that's obviously what's caused it. Obviously, Wales is well known for mining, so we know that there would have been large coal deposits back in the Middle Ages. Following on from that, it's guessed that the source of flammable gas is methane. That's suffocating. It can even blow people up, but most importantly, down in there's also hydrogen sulfate gas, which stinks like rotten eggs. it's poisonous and explosive. So there you've got two gases down there that are one highly explosive, but one is more smellier than the other. So would explain the smelly dragon breath that is frequently mentioned within history. So then this is where it gets even more brilliant. Going back to the book The Science of Monsters, that was written by a man called Matt Kaplan. He looks even deeper into the story of Merlin, and he puts out there that the way that this is explained is that Merlin caught the scent of methane or hydrogen sulfide gas in the air. He knew about chemistry, or enough about chemistry, of the coal mines. He then told King Vortigern to have his men dig there because he figured the chances were good that their torches would light something up along the way, and assumed they would view his ability to predict such explosive fire as magic. Not only does Merlin's hometown of Carmarthen sit right next to the Welsh coalfields, but the type of coal in the area and the geologic settings are both highly likely to have coal gas explosions, so it's also quite frequent. If that was true, it would mean that Merlin was more likely a geologist than a wizard.
Oh, yeah. Can't he be a geologist wizard?
I don't know, but it sort of brings from that magical thing. It makes it real. So obviously back then they believed in magic, and now we do explain a lot of things. But I also kind of like the idea of him being a geologist.
Yeah, science is basically magic, though.
It is. It's just, it's basically explained all those things we didn't know. And as years go on, things now that we still seen as unknown or unnatural, there's a very strong possibility they will be explained.
Exactly.
So then when you read also what that Arthur C. Clarke said, he basically put any sufficient advanced technology is not indistinguishable from magic. So it just goes back to the fact that wouldn't it be brilliant if the greatest, most famous wizard is actually a scientist in disguise?
Probably is.
Yeah, it probably is. So once obviously you looked at that story, then if you go back to the story of Beowulf and re-examine that, this threw up a slightly different theory, and that Dragon's Breath wasn't a coal gas explosion, but the methane released by grave robbers. And this is where it's another absolutely brilliant theory. I can see where they come from, and it's another way of explaining it. And this is,
but also it could just be leaking through cracks in the ground.
It sort of could be depending from where you're picking up. But this one explains the Beowulf one. Yeah. So an archaeologist named Elizabeth Barber and her husband Paul from the University of California, Los Angeles, held a conference in 2003. They analysed the Beowulf text, and they discovered that there are only 6 concrete elements present in the dragon battle story. So firstly, someone comes and takes a cup from the old burial site. Then the fire erupts and spreads. Near the entrance to the burial site, Beowulf stabs at the source of the flames, but is unable to kill the creature. Okay. The flames are foul-smelling. Beowulf's ally, Wiglaf, later stabs the monster, and this time the flames are weakened and die out. Finally, when Wiglaf goes inside the burial site, the line in the text reads, "No vestige now was seen of the serpent. The sword had taken him." This suggests that Wiglaf's blade had annihilated the monster, leaving behind no dead dragon to describe.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So Elizabeth and Paul argued that there's a lot of truth in this tale, and that both Neolithic and Iron Age people in Europe often built chambers for their dead. Inside, they would place valuables, including dead pets and horses, for the afterlife, so for them to take with it. The burial chambers frequently had mounds heaped over them, and the sediment was often so fine that it sealed the tomb aerobically from the surface environment. In more recent years, archaeologists have discovered that these mounds were so effective in sealing that it allowed methane bacteria that normally found in human and animal guts was able to expand, produce a lot of methane, which then built up inside these seal mounds.
Oh, okay.
Methane also smells bad when burnt, so the Barbers basically proposed that the theory that the Dragon of Beowulf is nothing more than a burst of methane escaping from the tomb that a torch-holding grave robber opened up and accidentally set ablaze.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you imagine? This is the explanation for dragons.
Yeah.
This.
But the thing is, it makes so much sense.
It does make sense, but I kind of want dragons to be real.
I think they kind of can be, though. So then obviously I wanted to kind of link this back to the ancient Egypt, and it's sort of thinking, well, okay, well, why weren't fire-breathing dragons mentioned until sort of almost Middle Ages, like medieval times? Yeah. Then I looked into it, and it was almost obvious then when I looked at it. Obviously, the soil types that are found in ancient Egypt are very different to that found here in the UK. And ancient Egyptians had much larger tombs, which meant there wasn't the methane buildup,
Yep.
which would have been one of the reasons why fire-breathing dragons are not mentioned before the story of Beowulf, simply because ancient tombs didn't explode into bursts of flames. It also explains why fire-breathing dragons only seem to exist in Europe.
Also, the mummification of the animals and people that probably
It took a lot of the stuff out. Yeah. So a lot of methane just wouldn't build up in the first place. But even if they did, the tombs are so on such a greater scale, and a lot of them as well, they had different chambers within them, especially if the person was higher up, so a lot of oxygen would have been.
Some they have like little gaps in the thing to let light in, don't they? So that's another.
Well, even the sand, they were saying as well, it's almost like there is cracks in it. Even as much as they've tried to seal it, there will always be oxygen going in and out. So
it will filter out. It makes sense.
So it explains why the fire-breathing dragons aren't there. Now, obviously, this then sort of goes back to the Chinese, and they're almost like in the middle, if you like, because I feel like, especially when you look at the Chinese New Year stuff and you refer to their dragon, I think their dragon looks very serpent-like.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of theirs has adapted from the ancient Egypt sort of view.
And I don't recall Chinese dragons breathing fire.
I don't, but then there is some, but I don't know if that's just more modern times. They have referred to, when you look at like the festivals that they do, but is that just because of more recent things that have been added, rather if you went back to the original, it wouldn't have been breathing fire. So I feel like theirs is quite heavily based on the ancient one, which is a much more serpent type creature. So I think I get why they feel that the dragon was based off a serpent.
Yeah, you see them when they're dancing, it's very serpent-like.
But it doesn't explain the whole fire breathing thing. Whereas I feel like the Welsh story and the Grave Robin, it does. Basically, my final part to this was, obviously, I had a good conversation with my sister about it. And then when she mentioned the Welsh dragons, this is where she brought in my favourite part of dinosaurs. Because obviously a lot of it is not just miners, there's archaeologists digging stuff up. So when you look at stories like Merlin, you've already explained the theories behind how dragons would have been able to breathe fire, but what about their size? And that was the only thing that we didn't solve in that part. And this is where the dinosaurs come into it. Now imagine you're an archaeologist digging in an area, or even a miner, and you hit a flammable gas source, fire-breathing beast roared out at you. That then dies down, obviously because the methane or whatever gas is now ran out.
What's left? A dinosaur skull.
Once that dies down, you excavate further to discover giant bones. Now, going back hundreds of years, it's not impossible that people that discovered those and thought it was the bones of a dead dragon.
That's what I said.
We would now know, we obviously now know that those bones are fossilised dinosaurs, but it makes for a great match for the dragon's size. So basically, my sort of theory is that the dragons were born from fossilised dinosaurs that were trapped in flammable gas vents underground.
Yeah, no, that I totally agree with that. I have nothing to say. I completely agree with that.
It's absolutely brilliant because my sister's obviously like dragons. I like dinosaurs, and I just really like the idea of the mystery of it. I like it when you can kind of explain where it's come from. So in a way, dragons aren't real. But they're born from something real. And I like the fact that you can explain how people would have come up with the concept of these. It's not just some, like I said, even in these stories, when you make something up, you've got to, you think when we write a book and you create something, you take it from other things. So it was, where did they get this from? And for me, the ancient ones, the serpent, it just wasn't enough to be like a dragon. To me, it's a completely separate creature altogether.
Everything you've put forward today makes sense. It makes perfect sense.
I just realised that especially that Welsh bit, it's so perfect as to where the dragons have come from, in the sense of literally, it does make sense. I just imagine hitting it. Can you imagine being in a dark area? It's dark because you're not necessarily going to hear, you don't hear the gas.
No, you're not going to hear it.
You just hit it and a burst of flame comes out. Like you'd literally shit yourself.
Yeah, and then like you said, you keep digging, and then there's the dinosaur skull,
massive bones. Yeah, and it's just like that's now the dead dragon, or even like another smaller dragon that's been devoured by a bigger dragon. Could you imagine a lot of these excavation sites where they found dinosaurs? Yeah, there's different sizes, so it's not impossible to think that someone thought that is actually
that's a very
the dragon.
Good one. When you kept saying it, when you was hinting at what you're going to do for this one, I thought it was probably going to be like a werewolf. And then you said it's going to be one of your favourite animals. And then went unicorn. So it's like horse, unicorn. But yeah, I was thinking werewolf. But I was also kind of thinking maybe you were thinking Frankenstein's monster.
Ooh,
to regenerate.
that actually would be a really good case.
Regenerate a human. I thought that might be what you was going to touch on.
Oh, I'm glad I kind of like I've thrown you out a little
did.
bit with this one then. But yeah, I thought it was so good. It was one of those as soon as I was writing. I hope I've done it justice now when I've read it out, because when I was writing it, I was like, I'm dying to do this case. I need to do it because
you've just solved.
Ripped.
You've solved dragons.
Yeah, and it's exactly. And I just love the whole science behind this. Like I said, that book was absolutely brilliant that Clara had put me onto.
No, I want to buy that book.
Yeah, I feel like as well I might be able to make another case out of it. Obviously, I've heavily sourced from this one guy. Yeah. There's little bits that I've sort of gone back over and checked the times because I wanted to try and narrow it down a bit more. But yeah, so I've obviously heavily referenced that guy, but I just thought everything he put forward, obviously even though it's slightly his sort of take on it, he's obviously done his research behind it. He's got a lot of that. So when I fact checked certain bits, it pretty much was identical. So I just really liked the story that he'd written and where the whole idea came from.
No, it's good.
So it is a mystery and it isn't.
Yeah. I think you just...
we've solved it,
he solved
basically.
dragons, yeah.
But I like that whole air of mystery behind because it is a mythical sort of creature, if you like.
You have, you've kind of solved it, but you've not disproven that the reality of dragons once existed.
Yeah. So like I said, going back to that ancient one, I don't know as though that was the earliest dragon. I can understand why people think that's where dragons come from.
Yeah.
And I think it also heavily influences the Chinese one.
Yeah.
But I definitely think the Welsh one and the flammable gas, I think that's basically where dragons were born.
Yeah.
I think. And I really like the idea of that. So they are our thing, aren't they? The UK, it is our creature, if you like.
I don't think we can claim it belongs to every culture. I think that's had them.
Yeah, everyone's. Well, I suppose it's like lots of different things. Everyone's got their own interpretation, haven't they?
So we have our fire-breathing one.
Yeah, that's ours. we'll claim that one. But no, I really liked it. I really enjoyed writing it.
I enjoyed that. I feel like I've learned something.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I feel there's something satisfying about being able to explain it. I think that's what it is. It's that satisfaction.
You did it.
Yeah, I know, I did it. So hopefully everyone else enjoyed it as much as us.
I think they will do. I think it's a learning podcast as well. It's not just true crime and
that's it. I think that's why we didn't want to make it too niche and go down one track, because between us we can cover a lot of topics.
Yeah, because you'll find something you're into. I'll find something I'm into.
Yeah. So no, it's really, really good.
That's a good case. I like that.
It was just something a bit different from what we've done so far, and I just really liked it.
I'm gonna look into the reanimation of humans next. We're not.
Yeah. Thing is, now I kind of want to.
I think we should. I honestly thought, I was like, okay, it's either werewolf, and then I was like Frankenstein's monster, and then today unicorn.
Well, I mean, at least we know we've got plenty of content going forward, because you've added to my long list now of cases to touch.
Let's see. That's a good thing. Right. I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
So keep creeping.
And we'll keep digging.